from the heart of Dubai, where tomorrow is being built today, to the world. Welcome to the CTO Show with Mehmet. Here, we redefine technology and reimagine possibilities. With Mehmet, delve into the riveting realms of AI, cybersecurity, and digital technology. Experience the thrilling highs and lows of startups. Immerse yourself in the spirit of entrepreneurship and witness the future of business innovation being written in real time. Now, without further ado, let's tune in and explore the future.
Hello and welcome back to an episode of the CTO Show with Mehmet. Today I'm very pleased joining me from the US, John Carse. He's the field CISO for SquareX. By the way, just for the audience, a hint. I had, Vivek Ramchandran previously. He's the CEO of SquareX, and today I'm humbled to have someone also from the team again joining me. John, thank you very much for being here with me today. Traditional question, tell me a little bit more about you, your journey, where you have been before SquareX, and then we can start the discussion from there. So the floor is yours.
Sure. I mean, I think that I've been in IT for a long time. I got my first computer in 1982 or so. And then did a lot of work in commercial space at the beginning of my career. But in 2003, I started getting involved with cybersecurity, working with the U.S. Navy. And I really didn't have any background in cybersecurity. It really came as part of a network and system management role that I had. And what came out of it was I needed to secure the system that I was handing over to the Navy. And that's where I started working on cybersecurity and security engineering in particular. Before coming to SquareX, I was at Dyson as their global CISO. Was there for a couple of years. And then before that, I was a CISO for a couple Rakuten companies, both Rakuten Mobile, a mobile network operator based out of Japan, and their product company, Rakuten Symphony. And before that, I was at Expedia, where I worked as an interim CISO there as well for a few years. So that's most. And then some other places I worked at, like JP Chase, where I ran their security operations and their global vulnerability management. So I kind of have a long history of cyber and IT work.
Great. Thank you again, John, for being here with me today. Now, a question, by the way, I know the answer because I've worked with cybersecurity companies and like global companies. But some people might ask, hey, we know what a CISO is, but what is a field CISO?
Well, I'm still trying to work out what a field CISO is as well. I think that for me, my career, somewhat spans innovation, leadership, cybersecurity, of course. And, whether that was building, defense and depth strategies for the U.S. Navy or leading programs in regulated environments. I gathered a lot of experience and what I feel like my role as field CISO is to kind of bridge the gap between internal security research and real world problems that CISOs are having and trying to solve, or maybe may not know that they have yet. And that's where I think the browser security part kind of comes into play. My experience there shows that there are some gaps. And so in my role, I bring information, try to engage with CISOs using my experience to do a couple of things. One, help them along their journey. And then two, if there's any kind of feedback or things that we need to cover gaps on the product side, I bring that back to engineering as well. I do a lot of evangelism, a lot of podcasts, webinars, and that kind of stuff as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, this is from my experience. So you kind of in a place which I admire, honestly, because you are doing, as you mentioned, both things. Being the evangelist for the technology, we know, for customers and prospects, and at the same time, you are the voice of them to engineering, and like, hey, this is what the community thinks about that. Like, we need to put something together. So I'm biased by source, so this is why I'm a little bit excited today to speak to you here, John. So You know, as I mentioned, maybe I'm repeating myself. So Vivek was on with me on the show. He's the CEO, and we talked about it. But let's hear it from someone who's been in the field also as practitioner for a long time, and mentioning that the browser is the new endpoint. So let's try to little bit dig more into the kind of a history, um, how things have shifted, and why you think that the browser is the new endpoint.
Yeah, I think that I was a little surprised by that as well. I think in my previous role, I had an intellectual protection program that we were rolling out, and we had maybe 144 different items that we were trying to cover off in this intellectual property protection program, right? And what I learned was that, a couple of things. One, that um, that we had way more SaaS apps in our environment than I thought we had. I mean, I thought we had like 200, I didn't really have a number, but when we did the audit, we had 230 um, applications that were part of our SSO and MFA and part of our conditional access policies that were sanctioned apps that IT had delivered to the organization. But what's surprising to me is that we had over 600 apps that were, SaaS apps that were not integrated into our SSO and our MFA capabilities, and they were not sanctioned apps. So we had a large number of unsanctioned apps that were there. And, as I kind of started to, think about like, how is this happening? Um, I started to see like this trend, right? And the trend was that, SaaS apps somewhat predominate enterprise IT from a rollout perspective, because there's a lot of intrinsic value that we get from SaaS apps that make it easier for IT to deliver capabilities at a really good price point um, to the organization. But inherent to that is that we're not always in the loop when people are adding additional SaaS apps. And one of the reasons that's the case is because the browser has become a great place to deploy software. Websites are a great way to deliver value, but that wouldn't have happened if the browser didn't become a more powerful tool. And as part of that power, the architecture behind a browser allows us to have very efficient memory management, render through the extension architecture, and HTML5, render things into the browser um, much more effectively and much more efficiently, and gives a really good user experience. And it also, in layman terms, what I mean by the browser becoming the new endpoint is that is that the inherent capabilities, the technology behind it allows for really um, robust applications to be deployed in the browser, which is great for IT because it's one less application that needs to be delivered to the endpoint, so that IT can deliver value to the organization. And as I was saying earlier, that the SaaS applications are creating a lot of value for IT, because IT allows IT to both send, bring new capabilities to the user, but also reduces our operating costs for doing that work. So there's less engineers that we have to have in place. But that wouldn't have been possible if the browser didn't become um, a powerful system that we could, have efficient memory management. We have different protocols that are running inside of like WebRTC, GPRC, et cetera. And it allows for a really robust, rich environment. And if you just kind of look at it, even in the like storing data and everything, the browser is where we're interacting with OneDrive or Google Workspace, and that's where our disk is. We have efficient memory management that's happening inside there, but there's not a lot of visibility in what's going on in there in the browser like we have on the endpoints. And a lot of that has to do with, um, how we used to deploy software, which were fat apps that were being deployed to endpoints that were inside private data centers, or accessing systems in private data centers that were inside a closed environment in our corporate offices. That's not really how we work today, right? And so, as a result, we have way more data and a lot more places that we need to be controlling.
Absolutely. I can relate, even from my own behavior. Like, probably I can say safely 90% of my time, in one of the browsers, right? So,
Yeah,
yeah, because, yeah, but compared to maybe, let's say 5, 6 years ago, yeah, couple of applications, of course, the office applications and so on. But even those today, I try to access them from the web, because like it's easy for me to find the file. So really, I can relate to this. Now, um, we understand that anything which is open widely, I would say, to the internet has risks, right? So, and when we talk about risk in the traditional cybersecurity term, we talk about detection and response, right? So, how we can bring this concept to the browser? So, how again we can explain to someone, maybe again in layman terms, that might not be very familiar with the all the bells and whistles, as we say, when we talk about EDR solutions and so on. So how we can you know tell them that there's something called browser detection and response.
sure. I think that the what's really changed in the last 10 years or so is, again, we used to have corporate offices that we worked in. We had our own private data centers, or data centers that we had, might be we had our own data centers, and we had our apps that worked inside this very controlled environment. Over let me say, so over that time, right? Over the last few years, as cloud computing started really kind of growing in like mid 2000 to 2006 kind of time frame. Um, you know, Applications started being delivered on the web. The browser got more powerful. What we've also seen is that people started being concerned about security, but most of the time when they're thinking about security, they're thinking about confidentiality, which started pushing folks into end-to-end encryption and other kind of technologies to secure those communications between our users using browser-based apps and the SaaS apps that were providing those capabilities. What that did for us, this changed from private data centers and corporate offices to SaaS apps that are running end-to-end security, encryption protocols, and running on SaaS apps. That change made a lot of what we do to inspect and identify malicious or not sanctioned kind of activities, whether that's insider threats or whatever, that made it harder for us to see what was going on in the environment. Well, that kind of takes all of our IDS and IPS kind of capabilities and our proxy kind of capabilities to kind of steer traffic, kind of started taking that away from us uh, with respect to how well we can steer traffic in the environment and then see threats. One of the nice things about the browser is that everything that happens in the browser before it goes into an encrypted tunnel or when it comes back out of an encrypted tunnel, everything that's in the browser is somewhat in the clear. So that gives us an incredible way to see what's happening
Mm-hmm.
as information traverses the browser, right? So whether that's a new protocol or someone's downloading a file, we can see all of that activity. We can see what context that they're running in, whether they're running into enterprise OneDrive or they're running in personal OneDrive. All that information is now available to us in the browser. And then based on that, we can then use our detection and response capabilities, whether that's identifying phishing attacks that are being rendered in the browser, whether that's getting someone to download something or trying to take over you know, uh, your rights in another application. You sign in with Google, then you have OAuth scopes that are being asked for to get access to your Gmail account or whatever you're accessing. Those things are now visible in the browser, and we can take an action on it. We can also see what extensions are being run and what those extension properties, or what the extension is asking for with respect to permissions and rights. And we can also control those, what software is running in that space. So it's very much like whitelisting or blacklisting, like we used to do on the endpoint. Now we have capabilities inside the browser to see, communications. We can see OAuth scopes. We can see whether someone's logging in with SSO versus a local, their local credentials, whether they're doing password reuse. Anything that's happening on the wire or inside the browser, we can see.
Right. John, I'm gonna ask the question that probably, even if I'm people, they will tell me you are putting your sales hat now. But if I'm a discovery call, right? So the thing that I need to uncover with anyone, and I do this just like not from a sale-ish perspective, I do it as a consultant also as well. So I need to shed some lights on what's going on in the browser space. So we said, yeah, we know there are some attacks. Some of them they were being with us for a while, like JavaScript injections and such things. So, and I know like as SquareX, you've published some security research, and there are some new attacks. So if I think about endpoint, I'm doing this because probably people will be able to relate. So if I think about endpoint, so I think about, yeah, like traditionally what happens, phishing email, someone clicks, you have a payload, it comes on the operating system and it starts to do encryption and so on and so forth. What's happening? What are like the major threats, you've uncovered in that research when it comes to the browser?
Yeah, I think that, again, I was looking at the Mandiant report last year and this year, and they were identifying what the key reasons are for attacks to actually be successful. And when I look at their reasons and I start adding it up, I think about 59%, 60% of the attacks that are successful that Mandiant's responding to actually traverse the browser for them to start, right? So there's a user component to it that's required, right? And that, again, if 80% of your time is being spent in the browser, you're going to have lots of opportunities to attack a user, right? And continue your attack chain to hit whatever objective you are as a hacker. Now, that what's interesting is that there's two kind of things that are going on. One is that the one of those things that's going on is that, or some of the research that we're seeing that is interesting, is how well we can hide our social engineering attacks, right? And how is it that we can get control over a user's profile and make it our own profile, so that when they're syncing their passwords back into Google Chrome, that we can take those passwords from them. We can gather that information so that we can kind of expand our attack into other places. We can also do something that we call polymorphic extensions, where we can disable an extension. Like, for example, 1Password is we have some videos on this on our website, but we can disable 1Password, impersonate a login for 1Password, re-enable 1Password, and allow the login to continue. And we can do all that using the extension architecture. Even with MV3, the new manifest requirements that Google put out, we can still take over profiles and everything just from inside the browser. We can also do what we call browser sync jacking, which is using extensions to download malicious code that we can then run locally. We can change the DOM so that we can say that something that's actually Google's website, we're rewriting their support message so that we're trying to get folks to click a sync action so that we can get this attack to kind of continue. There's so much stuff that's going on inside the browser, and that we can change how it is that the user is experiencing whatever pages that they're downloading by just controlling different aspects of it. So I think that social engineering attacks are going to get way more sophisticated, and that they're going to be able to trick users into, giving up their credentials, giving up OAuth scopes, giving up control of their local host just by, manipulating what's happening in the browser.
Right. How much AI is playing a role, John, here in this?
Well, I think that AI is playing a role in multiple ways, right? For example, in AI, we're seeing that getting from a exploit to a POC, that's happening faster. We're seeing that phishing attacks and other social engineering kinds of attacks are getting more personalized, right? And then on the response side, we're seeing, or on the research side, what we're using, defensively, we're trying to identify, write new apps to kind of test our theories on how attacks to occur. So it's helping us in threat research, but we're also seeing people using AI to help them understand what's going on in their environments and taking an action to respond better.
Right. Now let's talk a little bit about, SquareX. Again, it's a reminder for the folks. So what do you exactly do at SquareX? I mean, as SquareX, people know us as the browser security company, but can we all elaborate more on this?
Yeah. So what we do at SquareX is that we have a extension that runs in the browser that takes whatever browser you woke up today to use, and your favorites, Chromium on Linux, or maybe your favorites Safari on a Mac, whatever your preferences are. This morning you woke up with a regular browser that you're using every single day. And what we can do with adding an extension into the environment is we can make that an enterprise secure browser with just deploying an extension, which gives you an incredible amount of visibility and policy and capabilities inside your browser that secure your experience on the web.
Cool. So a question again, John, and you've done this also before. Um, CISOs, I'm talking about CISOs who are on the customer side. They have a lot on their plate when it comes, to prioritizing, the next thing that they should focus on. Um, why I would say now is the time to really, consider browser security as a priority for them. I'm not saying that because they have to drop everything else, but this is something they should put it under the radar because of all the threats that you just mentioned. So why it should be something they have to prioritize, I would say.
Well, I think the reason why they want to prioritize it is just that, as we mature in our um, security, right? We add additional capabilities to help us defend our environments better. Um, I think that the ground has somewhat shifted under a CISO, meaning that pre-COVID, people spent time in offices and we had way more data centers. I think that some research I saw that here in 2025, we're actually going to shift from less than half of our IT spend is going to be, um, inside of our own technology, our own data centers, et cetera, to I think 51% of our spend is going to be in cloud, and most of it in buying applications and SaaS applications uh, that we're using inside our environments. That shift has happened, right? It's been happening. But what folks haven't realized is that, relying on your technology that you use for your traditional data center, whether that's traditional corporate offices, whether that's DLP on the endpoint, EDR on the endpoint, SWG, that because of how we operate today, most of those interactions are happening in the browser. And there is definitely this idea that EDRs are going to protect me. And by no means am I saying rip out your EDR and replace it. Don't rip out SWG and replace it with a browser extension, because you still are going to have attacks that happen from other places that are going to get to your endpoint. You want to be able to detect and respond to what's happening on your endpoint. But if we can reduce the efficacy of an attack that's progressing through the browser to the user by threat detection and response capabilities that we have in our product, if we can increase the DLP capability so that we can stop people from copying and pasting out of an enterprise context, SharePoint into personal chat GPT or Pastebin or some other nefarious website, and have those DLP capabilities that are just happening inside the browser. And then we can also do private app access where we control who has access to what apps, as long as they're in a protected browser, because we're delivering a lot more capabilities on websites today than we had before. That's giving you another layer of control, another layer of visibility that you didn't have before. Even I remember doing incident responses where we're trying to, gather, the web browsing history from endpoints so that we can kind of reconstruct how things happened in a particular attack. With the visibility and granularity that you see in our product, you can see exactly the attack chain that happened. You can see what was in the clipboard when they pasted it in there. You can see lots and lots of capability. And the best part about it just happens on the browser, right? So you don't have any kind of latency involved with going through a network choke point before you get access to the internet. It's all happening in the browser. The policies are all right there. So you can protect whether they're online or offline, on the internet or, just in a, private network as well. So not sure I'm answering the question, but from a prior perspective, we have a lot, working in a remote world, we have way more attack surface that we have to work through. And these SaaS apps are not going to diminish in the numbers. They're going to continue to escalate. The browser is going to continue to grow into our use cases, and we're going to have more and more capabilities that are being delivered to us through the browser.
Yeah, absolutely. You answered the question, John. Just also one thing, because you mentioned the EDR tools, you mentioned about the DLP tools. Now, some folks might say, hey, like, yeah, but because we're using SaaS applications and the cloud, so we have implemented also the SASE solutions. So, like, again, I like to take a little bit the devil advocate role
Sure.
here. Yeah, but again, it's for of course educational purposes. So what's your take, or what you can tell them?
Yeah, I think architecturally, again, those SASE kind of capabilities, those CASB capabilities, they do play a role in helping us protect our environments. I think that most of them are working inside context where they're steering traffic, which is very traditional in thinking when we had private data centers, our corporate offices, and that's where most people were working, and that's where our application was deployed. But what we've seen is that when you're using these capabilities, there's a lot of context that's missed. Architecturally, they're built for a different kind of problem, and they are good at controlling what's going in and out of a network choke point, but they're not really good at determining whether something's happening, what's exactly happening, what context you're in. Like I said, it doesn't know if you're an enterprise, in an enterprise app or a personal version of an app. Like if you have an enterprise agreement with OpenAI for your ChatGPT work, great, you're on the right path. However, you need to be able to tell whether they're using a personal version of that context as well, so that you're not taking your confidential documents and sticking them into a personal version of, ChatGPT, right? To where you don't have the same kind of protections from OpenAI or Microsoft or Google that you would have inside an enterprise agreement. So that context matters, and that context is somewhat not visible to those traditional solutions. We have a great website, browser.security, and you can go test a number of different kinds of attacks, like, how do you move files from outside your environment to inside your environment and then back out. So we had this last mile disassembly or reassembly um, attack that we had at DEF CON last year on the main stage. And in that article, it's like, how do you get files into your environment? Like, if you're a hacker, how do you get them into your environment? But we've also had at B-Sides in San Francisco a few weeks ago, we also did a disassembly where we were able to exfiltrate data using those same techniques out. But that browser.security is a great website to go test your security posture and see if your tools are working like you expect them to work. Are they really going to block the delivery of malicious software through the browser? I think you'll find that they don't, right? So having a little bit more capabilities in your browser will be helpful to you.
Absolutely, good to know. I'm gonna make sure that also these links will be available for the audience. One thing, John, and this is, usually in cybersecurity is something common. When you implement a lot of security, you take little bit from the convenience. Now, people get used to, a small, icon in the tray, which is the EDR or something. Not much, it pops up sometimes. So we learned how to survive with it. Now, in the browser, an extension, and if it's, I would say, if it's like trying to restrict you a lot, it might give the user a feeling which is not very comfortable. So, like, I'm sure like you have done good job on this. I mean, as SquareX now, but what's kind of, I would say, balance for this convenience is needed between, keeping the productivity, but at the same time making sure that we're we are like accessing in a safe and secure manner.
Yeah, I think there's two parts of the questions for me. One is user experience, right? I think that one of the things that always so there's two things, right? There's user experience, right? And how does this new tool impact the perceived how does it impact the perceived usability of your device, right? Is it going to take CPU time away, or is it going to take memory away and your system is going to perform worse than it did before you added the security component? And two, how does it impact, the actual usability of the product? Like, are we blocking sites and stuff that you would want to use, right? In some ways. So let's talk about the first part first, which is, performance. Again, since we're not going back through a network choke point where we're evaluating everything out in the cloud, all the evaluations happening inside of the browser. So the 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 user experience is impacted almost negligibly. The user will not even be able to tell that a browser extension's there, right? And a lot of that has to do with how well browsers work today. Because I don't know if you know this, but in Chrome, if you go from one tab to another tab, or you have a third tab and a fourth tab, it starts putting the other tabs asleep and releasing memory and not having CPU kind of run it because no one's looking at it. But the active tab actually has work in it. And our extension takes advantage of those kinds of memory and CPU capabilities so that we're protecting what's there, what's right in front of you. And again, since it's running locally, there's no network latency or any other kind of latency that happens on the wire that allows us to protect the environment. So it's good user experience. And again, as I was saying, you're using the browser that you want to use, whether that's, Chrome or Firefox or Safari on a Mac or Linux or Windows device. It doesn't really matter. So the user experience is just the same user experience that they had earlier that day. So there's that part of it, right? The second part is that, it all depends on how you deploy everything, whether you deployed a firewall or you deployed a IPS or you deployed a EDR solution. it doesn't really, if you start applying policies that you haven't tested, you're going to have an impact. And for me as a CISO, as a practicing CISO, one of the one of the things that I've run across many times is every time that I apply a policy and it breaks something or it stops something from working, the first thing they ask me to do is turn off firewall rules, turn off the IPS, turn off EDR so that they can test to see if it's working or not. And then I'm waiting for them to turn it back on, which might be days, weeks, or months while they, uh, figure out what to do about the problem, right? So what my suggestion would be if you're going to, increase your security in the browser is take a monitoring and then block approach, right? So take a look at what's actually happening in your environment. Yeah, I think you'll find that there's a lot more activity happening in your environment that you actually realize was happening. And we have a number of monitoring policies that come out of the box that allow you to get a good feel of like what extensions are being used, what OAuth scopes are happening, whether people are using SSO or not, or if they're using MFA or not, or if they're using uh, their own, they might be using corporate credentials, but not part of your SSO. You can see a lot of activity that's happening, where they're going, what chat GPT, what GenAI tools that they're using. Um, and what SaaS apps are being used in your environment. You'll get lots and lots of visibility. And then as a security practitioner, you're going to have to start prioritizing what work you're going to allow and disallow, and talk to those user communities about why they're using X and not Y. Um, and then, start to shift behavior patterns by applying policies that mitigate or block. But there's also activities like KYC activities in banks, or know your customer activities in banks, that you're going to want to see a website that's new. And we have browser isolation built in so that if you go to a new website but you really want to get to it, we can allow that to happen, but happen it off of your network, right? So remote browser isolation activities. If there are people that are sending you files, you could turn on a policy that says it's okay for you to download an Excel file, but it can't have any macros. Well, we can disarm those things. We can rip the macros out so you can see the disarmed version of that PDF or Excel spreadsheet that you downloaded. Or we can even just show you that Excel spreadsheet in a browser tab, right? So that you can see that isolated Excel file inside of a tab, not downloaded into your OneDrive or not downloaded onto your endpoint and stuff. So we have a lot of different ways of kind of mitigating. Some of them allow you to continue working, meaning they allow you to continue to access websites. Um, and by the way, in our remote browser isolation, our policies flow with that. So our policies are already the extensions already installed in the browser that we bring up for you in that remote browser isolation. And then we can do additional kind of controls inside that are even different from what you have on your endpoint. So it's a very, 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 very long-winded answer, but one, you're probably not going to see a performance hit. You're not going to, nothing that's perceivable to the user. There is a performance hit because it's compute that's happening there.
Right.
But, it's really about how you deliver those controls that are going to cause you help desk calls and, cause you angst inside your security team. It's by, taking a good approach to how it is that you want to roll out your policies that mitigate the activity that you see once you understand it.
Yeah. So the nice thing about extensions, you don't get the question asked by people usually. Heck, yeah, like because when you talk about any agent that needs to be, or any piece of software that need to be installed, the question is usually how much CPU, how much memory. So extensions, they run within the browser, so you you're saved on that side. Now, as we are almost close to the end with this discussion with you today, John, um by the way, I need to like divide this question. So SquareX, and I think I talked, with Vivek less than a year ago, and a lot changed. Like, what are you enjoying so far with this, fast-paced innovation? And other than, what's happening with SquareX, what also is like also, I would say exciting you?
So what's exciting me at SquareX, or what's exciting me just in general, or
Both.
Sorry. Well, I think what's exciting to me at SquareX is, and one of the reasons I joined the company is that I was, as a practicing CISO, I was actually running into problems with how to secure the browser. How do I secure access to, in particular, DLP use cases and how to handle Gen AI. I really felt I didn't have the tools, even though I had EDR, even though I had CASB and SWG tools, and even though I had DLP tools available to me, I really wasn't I really wasn't able to control the environment the way that I think it needed to be controlled. Whether people were working remotely or working in the office, how did that work? Um, some of it involved just doing things like just changing the network configuration so that the conditional access policies would work better. But what was happening in the browser was a really big gap for me that I didn't realize was there. So I think one of the things that excited me about SquareX is, being a practitioner and seeing the gaps that were part of my intellectual protection program that I was running. Um, Seeing a product that was actually addressing it was is exciting to me. I feel like that I felt like I was um, at a loss. I had an information gap. I had been told by vendors that this was going to work. And then what I also found was that even though I was identifying gaps, and I think I had a really good relationship with my vendors, I was seeing that that their not ability to address the gaps, but their, where it was on their prioritization just wasn't there. So, working with SquareX, I was able to see how those gaps that I had were going to be closed, and that excited me. And I felt like that what's exciting to me about working with SquareX is just the part where I get to tell other CISOs and other security practitioners about a gap they may not be seeing today, but I think that is a meaningful gap that we need to control. So talking to other CISOs and educating them, doing webinars and those kinds of things are actually a new skill for me. Uh, but it's been a lot of fun, engaging with more CISOs and more security practitioners on this problem.
Cool. And in general, anything in cybersecurity exciting you, John, these days?
What I seem to spend my own time with is, playing around with Gen AI. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
as tried as this as, I mean, you can't get out of any phone call or anything without talking about Gen AI. But the
Absolutely.
but the truth is that we're at the beginning of this journey with Gen AI, and it seems like a lot of stuff's going on, and it's almost like, PCs in the '80s where you had 5.25-inch discs and 3.5-inch discs, and then you had 8-inch discs, and you have all these little form factors for how computers were gonna run. And there's like this all this spread of stuff that's happening right now as people try to figure out, like,
Mm-hmm.
what the right, approach is gonna be before it starts consolidating on something that's meaningful. I think we're lots of explosion right now, and lots of stuff to learn, right? From both a, hey, a practitioner, how do I use this in everyday life? But then how do you protect it as well? I think that um so Gen AI is somewhat exciting to me in a number of different ways. Usually I'm trying to figure out, like, how do I make something that's repetitive, that needs to be done at a doesn't need to, you don't have PhD. I'm not trying to do PhD work. I'm probably trying to do eighth grader, kind of work in the US. I mean, a 12-year-old, 15-year-old kind of time frame, something that they can do. That's the kind of work that I'm trying to automate. But that work is you know, um, we spend a lot of time inside of IT, inside of cyber, inside the business, doing a lot of repetitive work. How can we use Gen AI to reduce that workload so that we can use our brains for higher level kind of activities? So I think Gen AI is, you know, really exciting.
To this point, when I start to figure out the power of Gen AI, I start to remember, like, if Gen AI was in my time when I was still like fresh out of college, I wouldn't find a job because I figured out like all the tasks, because, you know, let's say creating users on Active Directory, and then, once you do this,
Yeah.
do that. And now you can automate a bunch of this stuff that we used to do at that time, right?
Yeah. I used to say the best administrators are the laziest administrators, the ones that like do something and it happens and then they automate it. Those are the best administrators because then it's a repeatable quality kind of work, and if the great thing about code and automation is that you set it up, and if you don't get the outcome you want, you can change the code and you can, increase it or decrease your efficacy as you change the code. And I agree with you. I think that a lot of stuff that we do is today that we're throwing humans at is actually interpreting what a human had wrote, what a human had wrote in a ServiceNow ticket, for example. If we can have something that can take that away so that we don't have humans doing it, but we can, break it down into the right steps so that we can automate the request that's being asked of us, we're going to make a much more responsive environment, to our customers, and then also reduce the headaches that, IT people have with, whether that's the rote work that we're asking people to do every day, or, um, the inconsistency and the quality of that work. If we can do that, we're going to just have better outcomes. So I think there's lots and lots of opportunities, um, for automation and AI and everything today that we just did not have when I was growing up and you were growing up probably. Right.
Yeah,
So
yeah, absolutely. Like because as someone new, I mean, and we did it even with the next comers. We used to give them these kind of tasks, which for me it was torturing. Like uh, repetitive tasks that actually can be automated. Yeah, and I was blamed because I was always on the hunt of how I can make this automated. I don't like to do repetitive tasks, but uh, world have changed a lot, and it's good where we are here today now. John, really, I enjoyed the conversation. Like time really passed very, very fast. So, but thank you for the detailed explanations about the importance of browser security in general, detection and response, and the cool stuff also, because things changed a lot since last year. And when people go and check the website, I think they're gonna see a lot of new products that they came within SquareX, like related to accessing security. I've seen like the thing you just talked about, getting things in and out, and trying to make sure that you have the proper security for that, especially in the age of Gen AI. So thank you very much, John. John, just final thing, where people can get in touch, and if they want to learn more.
well, they want to learn more about SquareX. I mean, obviously you can go to www.sqrx.com. If you want to get in touch with me, you can hit me up at john@sqrx.com, john@sqrx.com. You can find me on Twitter at John Carse, or X, or whatever we call it today. Um, and yeah, just reach out, and happy to help you on your journey.
Cool. Great. Thank you so much, John. So I will make sure all the links, even the ones we were talking about before, they are in the show notes. If you're listening on your favorite podcasting app, if you're watching on YouTube, you will find that on in the description. And this is for the audience. This is how usually I end my episodes. So if you just, discovered this podcast by luck, I hope you enjoyed it. If you did so, give me a favor, share it with your friends and colleagues. And if you are one of the people who keep coming again and again, thank you for doing so. You're doing fantastic for me this year, like by pushing the podcast in the top 200 charts across multiple countries. I'm so humbled and so grateful for all the support I'm getting from the audience. And as I say always, stay tuned for a new episode very soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hit that subscribe button, share the show with your tech-savvy friends and fellow entrepreneurs, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. Your support means the world to us.